He was born on the Mississippi Delta.
Hell
His
yeah.
name was Earl Christian Campbell. We just need Ken Burns now.
Exactly. Hey folks, how you doing? Welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast, episode 66. We about to get our kicks. Got my friend Steven Van Patten back here with me. Some of you guys, if you didn't catch the special we did a couple weeks ago, it was excellent, but we had some audio issues, so we got him back on the full pod, the audio hour. And I'm psyched to talk to this guy, and I think you're going to be happy with what you hear. He's a very astute sort of chronicler of the political scene, and he's also a colleague of mine in live television for many years. He's a DGA stage manager, which is no small accomplishment if you know the business. There ain't many of them, and they don't leave their jobs when they get them. You know, I was offered a DGA thing in 2000, and I already knew the deal. I was like, I'll be competing with the same people I've already been working with. And my buddy took that, Joey. I don't know if you know little Joey Despenzero. He took the gig.
I do.
Yeah. You know, he barely works. It's a political game. It's a great thing. But I was like, essentially, I don't want to take anybody else's job. And I like my little niche, you know, and I like not having to be in the camera meetings and all the official stuff you have to do. But anyway, exactly. So how you doing today, Stephen?
I'm good. I get into these conversations about what's going on in the news every once in a while. It's so funny. I just recorded an episode of my podcast with my other co-hosts, Mark Abbott, Kirk Johnson, and Denise Tapscott. And we were going to get into probably the stuff that we're about to get into now, but I think just exhaustion just kind of like just hit us a little bit. So we ended up like doing one of our more, I guess, comedic episodes. And we talked about, you know, the stuff that we were originally supposed to be talking about in our podcast, like horror and science fiction and all that other stuff from like the middle-aged Black lens, I guess. But, you know, I can guarantee you that the next podcast will probably be, I don't know, a lot more grim.
Right.
Because we're going to be tackling a bunch of stuff.
There's a
lot of stuff to tackle.
I hear that, man. And that podcast is called Wine, Beef, and Shenanigans, by the way.
Beef, wine, and shenanigans.
I get it wrong, but either way.
It is, you want to drink first. That's what it is.
That's me. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a recovering alcoholic. So I go right to the, you know, I'll eat dinner later. But it's a great name for a podcast. And it's a great podcast. If you haven't listened to it, do it. I was on it. And I liked how we did laugh, but we talked about serious subjects. And that's something that like we need more of. That's the kind of like comedy that I came out of. I came out of comedy where I grew up in PG County, like basically in the hood. It doesn't sound like the hood, but it was in the late 70s, early 80s. Outside of DC was, you know, I moved to New York and I was like, oh, y'all are soft up here. You have no idea. But, you know, so we laughed about serious issues, you know, and as you know, my comedy's about that. You know, it's I'm trying to tackle these things we're facing because they're coming at us a mile a minute. And I liked when you were on that podcast, you're the only guys who picked up on something that I talked about a lot on my own podcast and others, and nobody bit. And you guys got exactly what I was talking about. And it's sort of back in the news now. And I framed it as the Atticus Finch syndrome, you know, where there's a certain demo of middle-aged and older white people that are sort of raised to believe in these institutions, you know, and that the institutions will save them, particularly, you know, the Department of Justice. Obviously, Atticus Finch, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird, he was a defense attorney and sort of a fictional civil rights hero in terms of that novel. But, you know, the good guys now are not behaving in the way you want them to. Just last night, Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino, it was said, you know, by the DOJ that they weren't going to pursue charges based on contempt for not showing up to the Jan 6 committee. The Jan 6 committee is like, what the hell? Why not? You know, there's some speculation that they're trying to like build an airtight case and they're getting bigger fish. I personally don't really buy that. I think they'll go for guys like, Peter Navarro, who they arrested yesterday, but it's small fish. The big fish keep swimming because the pond has a lot of other people that are fishing in it, right? There's a lot of other poles in that pond, so to speak, right? And that's why Trump was allowed to be Trump for so long. And I'll shut up in a minute, but when I say something like that, I'm saying it from the point of he's attacked friends of mine. I know women that he's sexually assaulted. I know stuff that he's done behind the scenes that never came out, that NBC knew about, that was common knowledge in our business. And that's not to mention, the first case the DOJ had against Donald Trump and his father was 1973 for discrimination in housing, for racial discrimination. He put a big red C on an application that belonged to a Black family in Brooklyn and in Queens, where they got government loans to build housing, right? They got loans that were no interest loans from the FHA to build these houses for returning GIs and their families. They ripped off the tenants, they ripped off the government, and they racially discriminated, right? So that's 50 years ago, and the dude's still walking free, right? He turned 76 this month, not to mention all the other stuff, his pilots and the helicopter in Atlantic City that were, cooperating with a money laundering investigation. And all of a sudden the rental helicopter goes down. People forget about that, but there's a lot of smoke around that dude that's never been investigated, and I think that's harder for the white community to accept than it is for the Black community. And I can't speak for the Black community, that, but it was like the famous thing when Trump got elected, Chris Rock and I think David Chappelle went on SNL and they're like, what are y'all surprised about? We're not surprised.
Yes.
You know what I mean? This is how it works. Of course, y'all voted for the racist MFer. What I mean?
And it was funny. I was actually there for that episode.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I was actually into it because just kind of a funny thing. I was actually on a date.
Oh, no.
And Saturday Night Live doesn't normally call me. They normally have but I guess they must have been really stuck this one day. So I literally had the date drive me to 30 Rock in the middle of the date. And then I run out and I'm there just in time to throw this cue that they needed a third stage manager for the sake of the rehearsal. Then they all go upstairs and we're all just kind of commiserating or whatever. Then they cut the sketch. So now I was torn between, well, I could just go to hell home, or I could actually be here for this incredibly groundbreaking moment of Dave Chappelle addressing the fact that this Klansman's been elected president. So I chose the latter, and and I got to see all of that in person. But I mean, just the overall thing, as far as housing. Let's tackle that for a second. That hasn't been a fair setup since the New Deal.
Right.
And basically you're talking about the history of Robert Moses, and I'm not going to go into the whole arc of thing, but the long and short of it is the New Deal ended up helping a lot of folks achieve home ownership in the suburbs, while they built this, sort of opulent roadway, and they kicked people out of where Central Park was so they could make Central Park. And all of this negatively affected Black people and people of color in general. And the way it's been framed is more or less like this is something we wanted. We wanted to end up in these projects and then have, bad actors bring us these guns and drugs so we could be out here killing each other, and that was not the case. The truth is, the grab yourself up by your bootstraps crowd doesn't seem to understand that the deck was stacked since the 40s.
Right.
Okay, forget Trump in the 70s and the fact that nobody really called him out on that outside of Snoop Dogg during his freaking Comedy Central roast.
Right.
There's been a history of just keeping certain people in certain areas and then blaming them for it.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just it's just the worst con of all time.
Absolutely. Basically. And it becomes culturally entrenched. It becomes a generational thing. We got into that last time. The guys I went to high school with were the original white flight. They're the sons of the grandparents and parents that fled the inner cities for those leafy suburbs after World War II. And I love that you mentioned Robert Moses. I still see his legacy every time I drive around the New York area. And most people may not know this, but if you get on a road to go into like a parkway to go up into Westchester or go into Long Island, you'll pass through these overpasses, and they're like 12 to 14 feet high. That was designed so city buses couldn't bring Black folks and other minorities out to Jones Beach, up to the leafy suburbs. It was designed as a prison almost to keep a certain demographic stuck in the city when we invested money in sort of making the suburbs nice and making home ownership cheap. And it's funny to watch that to this day, because every day I drive these roads, I'll see a tractor trailer or somebody who didn't get the memo, right? He's following GPS and all of a sudden he's stuck and backing up. So it's a physical way you can see the legacy of racism in this country. And, a shout out to Pete Buttigieg, because he gave a talk this year from the podium and addressed that stuff. He specifically, I believe, called out Robert Moses, and we talked about this last time you were on the show. The Central Park neighborhood of Buffalo, where the top supermarket was once a thriving, like, Black success story. There was these big wide avenues with huge maple and oak trees down the center of the street. I mean, it was just bucolic. It had tons of wealthy Black families that owned homes in it. And what happened? Buffalo put a highway through it. The same thing, they did in New York up there, and they put a highway through it, and then that bisected the community. So the people that were on the one side of the highway couldn't walk to the grocery store on the other side of the highway. That's what's known as a food desert. The South Bronx is where all the food used to go through, Hunts Point, and they couldn't even get to a grocery store half the time, not to mention the exhaust. I don't mean physical exhaustion. I mean carbon monoxide. I mean poison. That's why they have the highest asthma rates in the country in the South Bronx. So we poisoned people. We put them, in gentrified or not non-gentrified sort of,
like traps,
right?
basically.
Like traps,
and real estate traps. Let's call it what it is.
And people don't understand how hard it is to get out of that situation. I'm trying to write a bit now about, like, people don't understand how expensive it is to be poor, right? You get higher interest rates, higher uninsured rates. Nobody gives you a loan. You got to take a payday loan, at a 40% interest rate. There's all these kinds of, like, penalties for being poor. We're a country that punishes the poor. When you're rich, you notice this because you work in TV, right? When you're a celebrity, everything's free. You never pay for anything. Like, why are you giving the free sunglasses to the fucking millionaire? What I mean?
I got a good one. You'll love this. So back in the Stone Age, when cell phones first became a thing, and then right after that, there was this point where there was like what they call two ways,
right,
or something like that.
And then Nextel,
yes. So nobody had this thing, right? And when these things first came out, nobody really had them. And then I remember, because I used to stage manage Total Request Live, I'm going in the dressing room to get KK Holiday, who used to be one of the VJs. And I'm like, okay, and he's just sitting in the makeup chair, and they're trying to do his makeup, and he's busy fucking with this thing. And I'm like, KK, we gotta go. And he's like, yo, Steve, man, you gotta get one of these. And I'm like, why? I'd only end up talking to you. Nobody else I know has this thing. What's the matter with you? And it's just goes to show you how out of touch people are once they live that certain life. And it's like, and I mean, he didn't mean anything by it. He didn't know, what I'm saying? But it's just like, my man, you got a free prototype thing and talking about, I'm supposed to go get one now.
Right.
First of all, I'm going to go have to pay half my paycheck for that because it just came out.
Right.
It's like, come on, man, stop.
Right.
So that was funny.
That's funny. Oh, and that's probably where I know you from originally, was because I used to do a lot of MTV stuff in the late 90s. I did all the New Year's Eve from the TRL studio. Remember back in the day?
I remember vividly. And so fun fact, New Year's Eve is my birthday.
No shit. Oh.
So, but yeah, it was funny. I had so many horrible birthdays as a kid that I, once it came to be that, oh, well, you could work. I was like, okay, then I'll work. So
I hear you.
I would eliminate having to figure out if I'm going to have a good time or not, and just, you know, and just celebrate my birthday with, you know, Blink 182 or whatever.
Exactly. And Gigi Bell, at least Gigi's there at the
and
front.
Gigi Bell was always there with a friendly happy birthday SVP and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, it was cool.
I love Gigi. But yeah, no, that's it. So I remembered in 99, I did a thing at the Garden called, it was like the 20th century greatest sports heroes for Sports Illustrated. We did this big live taping thing. And that was back in the day where they were just throwing stuff at celebrities. Like there was a little bit of crackdown because the tax-free, but this is where you get the $50,000 gift bag, you know, worth of stuff. And I had to go around for this guy who worked for like Ralph Lauren or Calvin Klein or somebody. He's like, go ask the celebrities if they want a free pair of new eyewear and all this crap. And I remember going up to Tiger Woods, you know, and I was like, hey man, you can get some free sunglasses. Let me hook you up. You know, he's like, nah, I don't wear that shit. He goes, I'll take some of their underwear. If they want to give me some underwear, I like the underwear. And I was just like, son, buy your own underwear. Like, what the hell, you know?
Right.
But I just thought of that. I sometimes share anecdotes with listeners, but we'll get back to the serious stuff. But, you know, I grew up in one of those, you know, I had a single mom, right? My dad left when I was 4 or 5. I lived in the kind of apartments that the Kushners owned, right? That they're famous, you know, it's not a term I like, but they call them like slumlords, right? They sort of own a lot of these low slung apartment complexes in the Baltimore and Washington area, you know, 2-3 stories, 60s kind of brutalist architecture, you know, no trees or bushes or anything, just like these, you know, like if you watch The Wire, kind of almost like those kind of complexes. That was a lot of what this stuff looked like. And, you know, you'd have infestations, you'd have cockroaches, you'd have things like that went wrong. And if you complained, you'd get evicted. And when I grew up, like I'd come home from like elementary school every day and somebody would be evicted in my neighborhood, you know, and all their stuff would be out on the sidewalk. And that's what we lived in fear of. You know, you didn't want that to happen to you. And there's such an inhumanity to that when you see a child stuffed animals and their bedding and their clothes and sneakers out, just put out on the sidewalk, no social safety net, no kind of thing. And you're doing it to people, you know, you're talking tiny rents. You're back then, we're talking like late 70s, or you're talking $380 a month, $400 a month, you know, not the kind of like thing where anybody's going to sweat letting that person slide for a few months and figuring out how to get them in a Section 8 situation or something. You don't have to put people on the street, but they brutalize people in poor neighborhoods, and it became institutionalized. You know, Reagan came in and made that the philosophy of the GOP. Ketchup is a vegetable. Screw you. Free lunchtime is over. Free mental health care is over. You know, free drug counseling is over. We're going to lock you up, because now we're not just making license plates in prison, right? We're making all kinds of other things. And that's a lot of goddamn free labor for 2 cents an hour, not to mention privatized prisons, right? Privatized prisons only turn a profit if they're always full. Right. And that became an industry, and it became an industry in these rural areas where the prison guards were themselves victims in many ways of this sort of like economic, you know, boot heel on their neck, but they're on the other side of the fence, right? They're the white.
If you have too many prisoners per guard,
right? So they get dehumanized, right? They get dehumanized, and that, you know, and that's in law enforcement.
Yep.
Right. You know, I have friends who became NYPD cops, and it changed them. Thankfully, some of them changed back, but, you know, basically they're like, look, my job is to beat up black people. That's what they pay us to do, you know, is to harass people in the hood to make white people feel safer. You know, that was Giuliani, Bratton, you know, Ray Kelly. That was the philosophy.
Yeah. It was certainly Giuliani. Oh my God. I mean, just, all right. So that was a lot. So with the prison pipeline, you also had a lot of judges that were compliant with that.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, you made like an honest mistake. Let's say you freaking grabbed like a jar of mayonnaise because it had like Darth Vader on it, or some kind of like, you know, marketing tie-in or something like that. And, you know, whereas in the suburbs, you know, you know the cop, and I guess I'm kind of touching on something Richard Pryor used to say. It's like, yeah, but you know the cop in that neighborhood. So that cop sees your kid acting up, there's a little slap on the wrist, he brings you over, you're embarrassed a little bit, maybe they scare you a little bit, but you get to go home.
Right.
You know, you're a 10-year-old in the hood, it's a completely different scenario. Like you damn near get prosecuted as if you were a 30-year-old that just hit somebody with a car or you know, did a drunk driving. And the next thing you know, you're in the system. And the next thing you know, you're just a cog in the wheel. You're in the matrix, and there's no way out now because, you know, you're deemed a problem child, and, you know, they're pumping you with Ritalin. And especially back in the day, Ritalin was like the sort of like the fail safe for a kid that was like too hyper. It was a child. It was, you know, and this is just a child, and you just have to try to figure out a way to relate to the child. But instead, you pump the kid up with Ritalin or some other crazy drug, and that went on forever. Right. And that didn't help anybody in terms of like behavioral issues. Yeah, just a mess. Just a mess.
Absolutely a mess. And you bring up some great points. You know, like once you get in the system, it's very hard to get back out of the system, right? Probation is set up basically so you're, you know, to punish you after you've served your time, right? It's very hard not to, or, you know, parole and stuff like that. It's very hard not to violate that stuff. You know, it's designed to humiliate. And the great example is this woman in Texas. You know, her name is Angeli Gomez. She's the woman who raced in there and saved her 2 kids, right? It turns out now she's on probation, and she's been on probation for like 10 years, which is ridiculous because she works, she's got a family. You're like, what the hell is she doing at 10 years on probation? She only looks like she's 30 years old anyway, right? But they called her up after she did what she did, the authorities in Texas, and said, if you talk to the press, we're going to see it as a violation of your probation. They tried to intimidate her, and she said, screw that. I'm going to talk to you anyway and tell you what happened. And what happened, for the listeners who don't know, is she was working her job, which is skilled labor. She was working on a farm. That's not unskilled labor. That's backbreakingly hard, very difficult, very skilled work that puts food on your table. So respect it as such. So she's doing her honorable, hardworking job. There's a shooting in the elementary school that her kids attend, hops in her car, drives 40 minutes, parks her car past the barricades where the cops had set up, right? So she took her vehicle closer to the school than the cops even got, saw the snipers laying on the ground with their long rifles and stuff, not doing anything. They tried to, you know, she started screaming like, get in there and do something. She's hearing gunshots. They put her in handcuffs. She talks her way out of the handcuffs because she knows somebody, and they're like, oh, you know, let her out. I know her. They let her out of the cuffs, and she runs into the school, saves her 1 kid, gets the kid out while the shooter's firing, hears that the firing is still on that end of the school and knows where the classroom is that her other kid is in there, goes in and gets her other kid out. So she not only does some like Delta Force level, like listening to where the shots are, you know, and measuring it and escaping, you know, with her children. She saw no cops in the hallways inside the school, nobody doing anything to save these children. Like, that's mind-boggling. And then she gets, you know, then she gets, hey, you better not tell anybody what you saw because we're trying to cover this up. I mean, this Uvalde case, and this, just so the listeners know, you know, Steven came on 2 weeks ago to cover the Buffalo shooting, and we did a very emotional episode. It's on YouTube about that, right? But since then, there's been this other, you know, shooting that rivals it in horror, if not, you don't want to say one is worth the other, but there's something about little children and not being saved, right? Buffalo had an armed guard, right? An ex-cop gave up his life because he engaged right away and started shooting. An African-American veteran of the police force was not scared, right? But all these white dudes in cowboy hats, you know, that act like fucking Rambo all the time, right? You know?
And isn't that the thing? Like, so here it is. This is supposed to be Texas, right?
Right. Tough guys.
All these tough guys in Walker, Texas Ranger, which I would probably be canceled right now if it were, you know, because there would be at least that much of a public outcry. Oh, you guys in Texas, you know, you're supposed to be tough. You're supposed to be like, you know, you're supposed to be like, remember the Alamo and all this other shit, you know, and it's like, are you kidding me? You
Right.
guys actually just like it's like you said, it's just baffling. It's like really, and the optics alone, um, leave. I want to say leave a lot of us that aren't white to kind of be like, okay, so were you guys just waiting to find out the nationality of the shooter? Is that like this is the kind of stuff that's being discussed, maybe not on television, but in the street, it most certainly is. It's like, so what exactly was the holdup? What exactly made you big tough hombres
Right.
like hold off on saving children?
Right.
What
Children.
was what was the thing? And it's like, and it was so funny because I've posted a fair amount of sarcastic things on social media, at least a couple of things, and then other people they're not hearing that I'm just making fun of the Texas cops, and they're taking that to mean I'm slamming all cops. It's like I'm not slamming all cops because first of all, I don't have that kind of free time. Like if I actually sat down and said, like I would have to dedicate at least a straight 2 days if I
Right.
really wanted to just break down everything that's wrong with law enforcement in this country and post it,
Yeah.
that would take forever. I was literally just focused on this one incident, and then other people started getting and just to something you said earlier. This is unfortunately this is how we're socialized, where we can't even handle hearing the truth without in our own heads getting things twisted up. It's like I'm just talking about this one group of cops
Right.
who failed to do what they are supposed to do. They protect and serve emblazoned across the vehicle. There was no protection. There was no serving in this particular incident. So at best, and considering that none of these guys are going to like lose their pension,
Right.
get in any kind of trouble. Well,
They have criminal immunity. They can't get into trouble.
and then that's the thing.
Right.
So you got all this stuff going against them, going for them. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if you get ridiculed on the internet, well, that's kind of tough titties. It's like I'm not above like if I had screwed something up that badly, whatever it is, you paint whatever scenario you need to paint, I would be publicly ridiculed.
Absolutely.
The same should definitely apply to these people that fail to save these kids, or at least attempt to save these kids.
100%. You make so many great points. And I hear you. Me, my whole Twitter is like sarcastic jokes. And the first,
Yeah.
and I don't make fun of, there's nothing funny about that situation, but the first cutting remark I had was a joke. I said they should have just told the cops that they were teaching CRT in those classrooms and they would have rushed in. And I put it in my draft. I said, this is going to be too, this is just too cutting for the moment. Let me give them some benefit of the doubt. By the next morning, it came out that the cops froze and they didn't rush in. And I saw those disastrous press conferences and I was like, y'all earned this. I'm tweeting this thing. And it got, 30,000 likes. But you made the point, like protect and serve. It's literally in the Uvalde manual that you have to be willing to put your own life at risk to save people in the event of an active shooter. So they disregarded their own policy. And if that shooting had happened in River Oaks, which is a wealthy neighborhood outside of Houston, and that elementary school was populated with white children, and the parents were outside saying, your ass better get in there and do something, you can be damn well certain that the cops would have rushed in that case. And I'm not saying that all those cops always have hate in their heart, but I'm saying they would have treated the situation differently. They certainly wouldn't have been putting old white ladies in handcuffs, little Karens in Houston that were saying go, they wouldn't be tasing them. And if you watch, you watch the videos of the cops, all their body language was they were more worried about the parents. I'm not saying they weren't freaked out about the shooting. They were, but they sort of viewed the parents as a threat too. And that's what everybody who's not white talks about in policing, and what I had the privilege of witnessing growing up the way I did, and also feeling like I'm not going to get in trouble because I'm the white kid. Like, it was me. Let me put it, me and my friends, most of my best friend was black. My other best friend was like from, he was Palestinian, I was like, I look like little Lord Fauntleroy, right? And we were we were hellions, right? This is the 70s. We were latchkey kids. You know, we'd be just
yeah.
egging cars and just, you know, there was a mall by us. We were just always getting in trouble. And I was always the one who got out of trouble. I'm a slick talker. And, you know, what are you doing here, kid? Get out of here before you get in trouble. Whereas, you know, Khalif Browder is a 15-year-old kid who gets accused of stealing a backpack and does 3 years in Rikers, 2 of it in solitary confinement. He's a 15-year-old who's 5'2". You know what I mean? Like, so it's obvious that there's a problem. It's so institutional. It's not, you know, it's not something you change overnight, but it's something that we have no choice but to amplify now. And I think if there's anything, and I don't want to say good because nothing good can come out of a tragedy like Uvalde, but you couldn't have a bigger police fail, you know, and people that are normally like pro-institution are like, oh man, those guys messed up so hard. And it'll poke a hole in that bullshit iconography that Texas always pushes on everyone, because you nailed it. It's like Walker, Texas Ranger, you know, like Lonesome Dove. Like I've done a couple Super Bowls and NBA All-Stars in Texas. They got like so many different kinds of cops. Like they got like 20 brands of cops. They got state troopers, Rangers, DPS, like, you know, Border Patrol, which, by the way, what the fuck was the Border Patrol doing responding to that? I know it's near the border, but the people that finally apparently went into the classroom were like Border Patrol agents. The town's budget, 40% of it is spent on the police force, and they have their own SWAT team. How did that SWAT team not get assembled and respond to a school shooting? If you can't respond to a school shooting, what do you have a SWAT team for? Like, SWAT teams exist for bank robberies and school shootings. You know what I mean? And you got Border Patrol agents, you know? So the whole thing stinks to high hell. They obviously have one of the most corrupt governors, you know, in this country, and that's saying something. So I think if anything, it will change some hearts and minds in Texas. You know, they're getting sold a bill of goods, and that whole tough guy Texan thing. If you go there, you know, they have the highest obesity rate in the country. Like, you think it's going to be all like tough guys riding around on horses, and you go there and like everybody's like overweight, you know, and like eating fast food like that. You know what I mean?
They traded in the horses for those little scooters.
Exactly, dude. Exactly. Like I saw an image, and I'm, you know, this is a generalization, folks. I'm a comedian. There's a lot of good hip people all over this country, you know, but
and in Austin particularly, even
right, exactly. Austin is dope. I love Texas. I like Texas songwriters, Willie Nelson, all, you know, I'm Lonesome Dove. Larry McMurtry was one of my favorite novelists. Like, I like Texas. I mean, I'm down with Texas, but blues, you know, Lightning Hopkins is from Texas. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. But you know, it's the myth. You know, America is suffering from a myth problem. And I think if anything is happening in these days, we're learning the myth is bullshit. And some of us knew that earlier than others. You know, I always thought it was weird. Like, I pledge allegiance. I was like, pledge allegiance? I'm in 3rd grade. Like, maybe I should decide who I'm pledging allegiance to. You know what I mean? But we're taught not to question our government.
That is right.
And the Second Amendment is bullshit, right? They were talking about a well-regulated militia that would be empowered and weaponized by Congress, meaning Congress.
Right. And your average yokel has taken that to mean that their citizenship makes them automatically part of this militia, but it's neither organized, and who the hell are you to actually even want to actually even think you have the right to just randomly own something that can blow like a grapefruit sized hole into somebody just because of some random shit you heard on Fox,
which is why the cops
are coming over the border and you know, the great replacement theory and all this other made up nonsense just to keep you agitated. It's all down. It does, to your point, it does come down to how people are socialized,
right?
You know, and the school thing, and you know how upset I am. Speaking about being a little kid in a public school, like, we used to play cowboys and Indians. Now, first of all, you little kid in the city, the scenario of cowboys and Indians is so far removed from your reality. Yet there you are playing cowboys and Indians, right? And then nobody wants to be the Indian because, of course, they lost or they're the bad guys. Meanwhile, the actual history is no, they weren't the bad guys.
Right.
First of all,
Right.
and they were being systematically wiped out. And then somehow that translated into a kid's game that reinforces the bullshit.
Dude, I just wrote a bit on that this week. I said, when
Okay.
I was a kid, we played cowboys and Indians. That's obviously politically incorrect. Now it should be called racist and indigenous people. You know, racist and Native Americans, right? There's no gray area in that. You know, it's the people that came to slaughter, you know, other people and steal land with the power of the gun. If the white folks didn't have guns, it wouldn't have worked out that way, the way it did. You know, this would be probably a paradise right now, and there'd be some white people living alongside, but they slaughtered also the population that probably lived in concert with the earth better than anybody else. You know, like it breaks my heart to think of the knowledge that we probably lost, you know, in wiping out a culture that had been here for tens of thousands of years and lived in this rugged and beautiful land in concert with nature and knew which herb to eat to cure an ailment, knew how to like take from earth and honor it at the same time, right? They didn't keep their animals in centralized factories for profit. You know, they ate a buffalo and worshiped it and used every part of it to help sustain them and then honored its spirit. That stuff is not hocus pocus. That's how you live on this planet and thrive. Okay, because there's energy in this earth that we don't even know about and we've lost. It's like burning a whole library full of books, you know, and being like, oh, Shakespeare didn't say anything.
Which white people are guilty of too.
Bingo. I didn't even see that. I walked right into it, right? But you know what I'm saying?
I do.
That was replaced with industrialization, with get a gun, get a power. Now we got coal we can burn. We can get a locomotive and we'll get a bunch of people from China to build the railroad and make them, you know, and then we'll steal a bunch of people from Africa and make them work the fields. And then we'll get all rich on it and we'll congratulate ourselves, right? And how we're bringing this new democracy to the world. And let's go back to the Second Amendment thing. Patrick Henry was an anti-federalist, as was George Mason. And both of those guys wouldn't sign the Constitution. They were both framers, you know, founding fathers. They wouldn't sign it. So to appease them, they had another like Virginia ratification ceremony. And they said, all right, you know, James Madison or whatever, like we'll come up with this militia thing. Because those guys were worried, like if the government decided to become abolitionists and the army didn't protect them, then they were going to get slaughtered by the enslaved people. And Patrick Henry at the time was the governor of Virginia and the largest owner of enslaved people and a wealthy man off of his plantations. And what else had just happened right then? The Haitian Revolution, right? Where the Haitians had thrown off their French colonial captors and became the first free Black nation in the Western Hemisphere. And then they pulled some other hocus pocus and said, now y'all got to pay reparations to your owners. And that's why Haiti is still impoverished, because they were bound with these laws like, all right, y'all can be free, but you got to pay us back what you were worth to me, which is just insane, right? Insane, right? That's some shit. And you know, my grandma passed away a couple of weeks ago. She went and built schools in Haiti and wells and did a lot of work there. And most people still don't even know that story. But not about my grandma, but about the Haitian Revolution. But my point is, the Haitian Revolution had just happened at that time. It was like 1784 or something. So these guys spoke out against it. George Washington, all these cats were like, yo, that's violence. That's not good. Like they were all writing op-eds like, what are y'all doing down there in Haiti? Come on, peace and love. Don't be cutting our heads off, right? So that's what these dudes were worried about. It was all racism at its core, and how do we dominate another group of people and protect our way of life? And that dovetails perfectly with the modern NRA, you know, which was taken over in the late 70s by a racist, this dude named Harlan, who liked to shoot immigrants and stuff, and introduced legislation called like wetback legislation. It was an open racist, and he basically had a coup at the NRA, because the NRA wasn't always like Nazis like it is now. It used to legit, you know, be like dudes who like to shoot rifles and go hunting. And, you know, there's only so much money in that, right? You're only going to buy so many deer rifles in your life, right? But if you tell these white people they need a bunch of military style weapons to protect themselves up in the suburbs, because, you know, the black folks are coming and the Mexicans are all coming to kill them, then these dudes are buying guns every other day, right? And that's what we see now. I'll make one more point. gun hoarders. Okay. People are hoarding guns, bro. And let's just tie this into the like Second Amendment. Okay. So you're talking well-regulated militia. Okay. Right now, there's 400 million guns in this country. Half of those guns, 200 million guns, are owned by 3% of the population. 3% of the population is 10 million people. So there's 10 million people that have at least 20 guns apiece, right? Modern weapons, okay?
I basically think they're Michael Gross and Trimmers.
Bingo, right? The armed services itself has 1.3 million active duty members and 800,000 reservists. So 2 million people, right? So do you think the founding fathers meant we're going to have a well-regulated militia that's 5 times as big as the actual army? No. Right? No. Do you see what I'm saying? Nobody would empower like private citizens to have the ability to sort of, you know, take over the army. Obviously, that can't happen now because we have bigger weapons, you know, which is the other argument. Like, if you just want to simplify it, mine's complicated. Simply like, you're going to overthrow the government. Like you're going to shoot at a freaking tank, like, you know, or a nuclear bomb. Like, you're not, right? So the whole thing is just such bullshit. You know, it drives me nuts.
Yeah. No, I mean, as far as all that goes, I mean, I feel like with the Constitution, okay, think about when it was originally put down, you did have like the skirmishes with the Indians. You did have the threat of slave revolts. And I'm sure that, you know, those good old boys with their massive plantations and making, because here's another thing that people don't really talk about when they talk about, when the conversation of reparations or any of that stuff comes out, is that the main reason that this country is so wealthy in the first place is because for a time, we supplied the entire world with cotton. And once the cotton gin was built, our output like just went up astronomically. I forget the exact math, but it was insane. And you can think about that for a second. You're supplying cotton. And every country, everybody is using cotton. You're supplying most of the world with cotton. And it's our biggest gross national product at the time. It is how this country got as wealthy as it is.
Yep.
And that alone, okay, is one of those big things that somehow doesn't make it into actual school curriculum.
Right.
Don't talk about it. Not even in Black History Month. At no point in school did they say, well, you know, one of the reasons that America is so wealthy is because of how we beat these Black folks up until they made so much cotton that we were able to supply the entire planet with it.
Right.
Nobody brings that up. All you talk about is Dr. King, little Malcolm X, and then anything else. You know, if you're a Black kid, you go learn that from your mom or your grandmother. And then, of course, if you're not, you don't know any of that stuff. And, you know, the way that Dr. King thing is framed, of course, is that, well, you know, racism was a thing, but, you know, we kind of solved it after we killed Dr. King. And you know what? There's really no reason for them to be complaining about. Look at MTV. CJZ, isn't he having a good time? Yeah, Black people don't have a problem anymore. Look. Anyway.
No, that's great. And the doctor, go.
No, and all I was going to say was, you know, to frame the whole, going back to the whole CRT thing, you know, and just the fact that you're not teaching the actual history, you're going to constantly have everybody at odds.
Right.
Because you have MSNBC more or less telling a version of the truth, which of course is closer to the actual truth without, you know, with leaving certain things out. But over on the Fox side, it's just all fabrications and bullshit. Right. And all this sort of like, no. It's like no one really has an argument. No one really has anything to complain about. This is a wonderful country and everybody's treated equally and everything is fine. Meanwhile, that is complete nonsense, complete trash. And yeah, so it just gets exhausting because you end up in these arguments with these people that don't know the history of the country, don't know how we got here, and think they're completely justified in feeling how they feel, completely think that whatever is wrong with the Black community, that's completely our fault. And while there are certain things that, yeah, we probably could have, maneuvered out of or whatever. But the funny thing is that, it's hard to maneuver when you're in the same fishbowl.
Yeah.
It's hard to maneuver out of certain things when you're in the same space where, it's like your truth is being denied, and you're constantly in a place where you have to do more and still get less.
Right. And your trauma has never been addressed, right? The original sin of what we did to the Black community and what we continue to do, from Jim Crow laws all the way through the civil rights in the mid 60s. 5 years before I was born, you and I wouldn't be drinking out of the same water fountain. What the hell is that? And we don't even address that. And then you look at the Black community and what they've contributed to this country, how they responded to malice and brutality with beauty, with art, right? With jazz, with blues, with rock and roll, with all these other commodities, right? That then the white folks are like, oh, there's a lot of money in this. Let's do an Elvis, let's sell 1,000 records, right? I want to write this bit like, all right, if you don't want to pay reparations, how about paying Black folks for what they've given? Jazz, right? That's got to be worth a couple $100 million. Rock and roll, that's a few $1 billion right there, right? Hip hop, thankfully now, is in the hands of many Black entrepreneurs. But, and I'm just talking about entertainment, right? How about all the scientific inventions? How about all the medical contributions? How about the contributions to legal, right? To legal things in this country. Do you know what I'm saying? To like teaching us how to react to our better selves. How about like how to, when I grew up, the thing I got, and it was one of the best blessings of my life, was having a multicultural like neighborhood. And when times were bad, what I learned from my Black friends was like how to dance. They would dance and party in a way where I would tend to hold on to resentment. Like mom's an alcoholic, dad's missing, like what's there to fucking, celebrate? And they'd be like, well, this is what we got. Let's just celebrate. Let's just have a block party. Let's just dance and unselfconsciously enjoy life. And that's something white folks can learn from. I remember the first time I brought a date who'd never been exposed to the Black community to a wedding in Brooklyn, a Black friend of mine. It was an actor, great actor named Greg Prather. I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts with him, and he was getting married, and she was like growing up on the Upper East Side, like, sort of wealthy, different kind of world, right? And the first time she saw an electric slide in full effect, she was like, oh my God. Where has this been my whole life? I'm just using that example, but where is this just pure, like, sort of like
joy,
pure joy, man? And joy is what we need. Joy is not an affect. Joy is your birthright. Joy is what you should feel in a healthy world. Like we should be celebrating full bellies and safe, happy, smiling kids, and good food and music and helping each other out, and honest work. And it's all right there for us, so that's a bit of a rant, but that's always my take on it. Like, why are you still punishing people who deserved, who were well within their rights to sort of punch back in a way that the Black community never did? People like to say, oh, well, we've got to fear. No, what are you fearing from? You know what I mean? I should have been getting my ass kicked for just being white in my hood, and I never did, because it was acceptance. And also, because that's not human nature. And I think when you take a lot of things away from a people, what they really have gets stronger. The stuff you can't buy, the stuff you don't put on, like the white folks had wigs, right? All these guys and the fancy robes. And like you said in school, you spent a month learning about Thomas Jefferson. They never mention, and I saw this in a historical document recently, Ida Bay Wells, who did the CRT stuff, put it out there, and it showed the provisions that he would give the enslaved people for a month, right? And it was like half a pound of fat back, a pound of flour, a pound of corn, and a couple of dried fish, and like 5 smelts. That was meant to feed an enslaved family of 4 for a month. So they were not only working them to the bone, they were starving them. right?
Yeah.
The bare minimum to
Keeping them
keep a human
barely alive.
barely alive for profit, right?
Right.
And that same model still exists today. Jeff Bezos is building rockets and doesn't want anybody unionizing, wants to pay you $12. I'm not saying it's the same as slavery, but that economic model where you cut cost at the bottom became like a religion to the conservative elements of this country, right? That was the whole Reagan era and stuff. And like, greed is good. No, greed isn't good for anybody. It rots your soul and it weakens the world around you. And now we're really feeling the effects of that on a massive scale, right? Because now the haves got it all, right? 1 to 3% of this country has like 90% of the wealth or something ridiculous like that. There really is no middle class in the way there was, right? And that middle class was created, I'll shut up, but that was created by socialism, by the New Deal, by Roosevelt, and all these kind of guys are like, we're going to tax the top and we're going to start spreading it around, because they just come out of the Great Depression and they saw what can happen, and now it's sort of happening again.
Yeah. I mean, all I was going to say on that also was just like, my whole thing about Reagan, because, it's funny because as a child, I knew something was up with Reagan, something really bad. And at the time, I didn't even know that Reagan had already cut the legs out from under the Black Panthers, which was a big thing because, just going back to the whole NRA thing, it's like, so here you have the Black Panthers, and they weren't like, armed to the teeth and all this. They just had just enough weaponry to defend a community.
Yeah.
Just to be able to, like, for when the cops came and tried to do some kind of overreaction to something, they're like, oh, no. You can go. We've got this.
Right.
And it's like, it was like a whole thing, policing your own communities and school lunches and just taking care of your own and making sure that the system didn't completely brutalize a community. And hateful ass Reagan, oh, no. We can't brutalize? What the hell is that? Nope. And I mean, it's just like just the litany of horrible boogeymen that have plagued our community for the longest time, from like Harry Unsingler, who I think I mentioned last time, J. Edgar Hoover, who, I mean, literally responsible for the harassment and ultimate like demise of every civil rights leader from Marcus Garvey on to Dr. King and Malcolm X, and everybody in between, just with the surveillance and the, the pictures of stuff that, maybe because I guess well, there is no guessing, Dr. King was, he was, I guess, cheating on his wife or whatever. But, the fact that you got involved in that's where tax dollars went.
Yeah. John Lennon.
Somebody's messing around on their wife. It's generally a private matter. I'm not justifying, I'm not saying it's right or anything like that, but it's a private matter. But in that case, the government decided to say, oh, well, Mr. Civil Rights guy wants to have a little pot. Okay, we got a trick for that. Your tax dollars going to work.
Yep.
Your tax dollar, and it's like, how does this even make sense?
Right.
How? And it's like something we kind of touched on before we started. It's like, my own personal belief has always been that government should have some level of compassion attached to it. Otherwise, what's the point? Because I can go fuck up my life all by myself. I don't need the government to come help me. You know what I mean? So I'm just kind of, I'm in this weird place right now, especially going back to what we were talking about last time we were together with like Dr. Oz and all this. Like, it's like it's just this never ending line of boogeymen, and it's like, it's the only way I can kind of explain it. And they just keep coming up, and they keep spinning their little stories and their little their little spin doctors and everybody else, and they get into all these, they get their hands into all these things, and they want to rule the country. But it's like, but you don't care about anybody. You're not there to serve the common good. So it's like, why do you want the job? And then ultimately, I guess the answer is power.
Power and more money.
Power and more money. And okay, fine, but there is just a suffocating amount of hypocrisy attached to all that. And so here we have, among other things, we have Dr. Oz, who, as I mentioned before, may have been great heart surgeon, quarterback, brilliant guy in his own way, but just, not somebody you want in charge.
Right. And Steven, for the listeners, was Dr. Oz's head stage manager for many years.
For one season.
Or one season. He was out after one season, which tells you a lot about Dr. Oz, folks. Because if you get a steady show, usually you stay at it, and we don't have to get into why you left, but you made the point. He's a billionaire. Basically, his wife owns a Splenda, the big tree service company. He's worth tens of millions of dollars. He lives in New Jersey on the Palisades. He's a Turkish citizen. He's got dual citizenship with a country that's run by a dictator. And I got no problem with Turkey. I wear Sabas. Those are Turkish shoes made in a little village in the Middle East. So I'm down. I'm down. But they're cool. But I like style on my feet. You know how it is, even around the house. But you never you said it. It's like empathy. You want the politicians that have empathy. I don't always tell people this, but like I did a show with Jimmy Carter. It was the Goodwill Games. It was the late 90s. And we were doing this thing down at the Wintergreen. Remember in the Twin Towers, they used to have this like thing in front of it before they were destroyed. It was like this big like glass thing. I think they called it the Wintergreen, but it was the Goodwill Games. So you had George Pataki, Giuliani there, and some other big shots, Ted Turner, and I was assigned to Jimmy Carter. And he shows up and he gets out of the little limo. He's got like one Secret Service dude with him who was like this little Asian dude with a lazy eye, right? And he was like my size. And I'd never gotten the sense from another human being that they could kill me with their little fingers more than I did from this dude. It was just like, I was like, oh, this is the baddest motherfucker on the planet, because you'd look at him and you'd be like, nothing to him. And then you sort of like looked another second and you're like, oh no, that's Bruce Lee. Like that dude, like that dude can handle his business like an Israeli, guy. So you're just like, it was very funny. I still remember it like 20 years later. But so Carter gets there, and Giuliani had already thrown a temper tantrum on me. I've talked about this before. He cursed me out and all this stuff. And he wanted to see the sides off of the teleprompter before he'd get out of the makeup chair. And I'm talking to you guys on the headset, because stage managers are freaking out. Like, where's Giuliani? He's supposed to be stage right 5 minutes ago. And I'm like, he won't leave the dressing room. He's cursing at me. He's literally like cursing at me and throwing shit at me and stuff. But then I go to get Carter and all these guys are waiting, and I start to bring Carter to the stage, and he sees this little school kid, who happened to be a young black girl, right? It doesn't matter what color it was, but like he sort of like went down to her level and talked to her like she was the only person in the world. And it wasn't, because at first I was like, oh, he's talking to the black kid for the photo op kind of thing, because you see a lot of that shit, as a lot of people, oh, look at me, I'm the man of the people kind of thing. This was legit. He was like, what's your name? What grade are you in? What's your favorite subject? What are you reading right now? What's the last piece of homework you did? Like, she was the only person in the world. And it was from a genuine like place of having an open heart and caring, and like, that's what you want. I saw the same thing in President Obama. I saw the same thing in Bill Clinton, who's a flawed man by any metric, but, cared about people. He came from nothing. He was Hope, Arkansas, single mom, broke, I don't trust billionaires that are running for office, because if you have $1 billion, you could do so much good anyway. You don't need the public office. You got $1 billion. You can go start paying off student loans and getting animals out of shelters and feeding school kids. And, you mentioned the Black Panthers like that. People don't even understand what the Black Panthers were, because it was just told like, these are terrorists. This is something to fear. I knew Afeni Shakur, who was Tupac Shakur's mom. Okay. She was one of the original Black Panthers. I got to work with her on a VMA show, as a matter of fact, with her and Biggie's mom. We did at Lincoln Center, but I was a fan of hers. I knew who she was, and I sat down and talked to her about it. And the Black Panthers in Oakland were policing the police. And they knew, because there was so much police brutality in that hood, they said, we're going to show up on the perimeter. So we won't affect the police action because we know we have to stay within our legal rights. We're just going to observe. And if we see something out of line, we're going to report on it, and we're going to do it armed. And the rest of their program was getting school kids breakfast and stuff because they was a completely impoverished, forgotten neighborhood, you know, so they were policing their own. They weren't like, oh, we're going to take down the government kind of shit. But Reagan, who was, as you mentioned, who was governor of California back then, signed a law that the NRA backed, which was taking away their weapons, was taking away their guns, right? So the NRA has no problem taking guns away when they're in hands that aren't white and racist, essentially, right? The NRA literally backed a bill. The name of the bill is escaping me, but anybody could look it up. It was an NRA-backed bill that Governor Reagan signed to take away the weapons from the Black Panthers, you know, which just shows the hypocrisy of the argument, you know, and it, like you said, Edgar Hoover, like when you talk about Dr. King in school, when you're taught about it, all they teach you is nonviolence, right? They're just like nonviolence. And he said, don't hurt anybody. And he was a civil rights leader. And he said, yeah, don't hurt people. Even if we punch you in the face, don't punch them back, right? They don't do shit on Malcolm X, right? They don't want you learning about Malcolm X. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And Dr. King, I mean, I'm all for nonviolence. He was a, you know, that's a spiritual stand, you know, that we can all aspire to. You know, Gandhi, you know, these guys are doing this, but like, you know, I got to be careful with my words here, but you kind of feel like that would be updated a little bit. You know what I mean? Because there are times where self-protection is warranted, right? Absolutely. You know, and I'll shut up now, but like, look at the Capitol attacks. You know, the hearings are starting next week. And as I was watching them, and as many people were, I was like, if those were Black folks, we'd be watching a bloodbath. They would have turrets on top of the Capitol right now, taking these dudes out. I remember, what's his name? Wonderful comedian, African-American comedian, like the original guy in the 60s. I mean, before Cosby and stuff. I'll have to look it up.
Red Fox?
No, not Red Fox, who I loved. Very politically outspoken. They just did a great documentary on him.
Oh, Dick Gregory, maybe.
Dick Gregory. Thank you. Thank you. The kindest compliment I ever had was somebody compared me to Dick. I was like, no, what are you doing? Like when the publicists do write-ups, I get Dick Gregory and Carlin and other things that would just make me look like an asshole, you know, but you know how publicists are. It's like, but I was with Dick Gregory, and I'm friends with Dick Gregory's, oh, he passed away, but his publicist. But I believe, yeah, he definitely passed, right? Oh, but when Clinton got elected, the day Clinton got elected, I lived in DC and I was a bike messenger in Washington. And I went to a rally at the park across the street from the White House. And this is before the whole thing was like on lockdown. You know, 14th Street was open, like Pennsylvania Avenue, you know, the White House was sort of right there, and there's the park across the street. And I'm there at a rally with Dick Gregory, and he goes into a rant about this stuff, about how there's two sets of law. And he goes, every time I speak, you know, I've always had like FBI and people like follow me around. This is Dick Gregory, who was on one of those watch lists that Hoover put him on in the 60s. And he goes, and to this day, I'm a threat. And he goes, if you look over right now, you'll see some snipers on top of the White House. And I want everybody to turn and wave at them. And sure enough, he pointed at the White House, and there's two snipers up there because there was a gathering, you know, in Lafayette Park or whatever it's called. And, you know, everybody waved. And he was like, hey, snipers, how you doing? And he waved and stuff, right? But it was a lesson. You know, it was a lesson. And this, at this point, he was old. You know what I mean? He was like 70 years old then. So, you know, it just shows there are two sets of rules, right? You know, that's what Trump era is showing us. Like the fact that these dudes are still walking free a year and a half after they did what they did. It came out yesterday that Mike Pence's chief of staff, Mark Short, had to call up extra Secret Service to protect Pence the next day because Trump was going to turn against him at the rally.
Yeah.
Like, that's insane. I don't think, and that didn't barely registered.
Like, and you know what else is crazy about that whole story? So apparently he's very good friends with Dan Quayle.
Oh my God.
But it was Quayle At least this is how it's being framed. Because and every time I hear a story like this, don't get me wrong, it's like it's a relief, because it's like, okay, well, at least somebody over there has some kind of fucking sense. Right. But then at the other side, it's like, it's kind of like, I also feel like they're also mitigating their because just in case full blown fascist Nazi, whatever they have, whatever a percentage of them seem to have kind of like ready for us, in case that fails, they don't want to lose the party completely. So they like to have like, oh yeah, well, they like to remind us about stuff John McCain did. And they you know, and then they have these little stories like this one about Dan Quayle, which is apparently supposed to be true. But apparently Pence got Quayle on the phone and during the whole thing, and it's like, hey, I don't know what to do. And he was, and Quayle's words to him were apparently, do your job. And by that, he meant, you know, ratify Biden.
Right.
Which is interesting because, I mean, let's face it, Dan Quayle's not invited to the barbecue.
Right.
At all, you know. But here it is. It's like there was at least that much of a reasonable train of thought that got Pence through that. What's sad about that is that's going to actually be framed like as heroism,
right?
You know, when that's really just bare minimum of what was supposed to happen. That's really just it's like we have gotten to the point where, you know, just expectations have just been so mitigated to the point where anything that's remotely decent, fair, or just makes sense, just logical, is all of a sudden this like massively heroic act. And it's like, no, it's what you were supposed to do in the first place. You know, it's but this is how the narrative is just so manipulated and just so corrupted right now.
Right.
It's just like, yeah, you were supposed to ratify Biden because he won the fucking election.
Exactly. You're rewarded for doing your job. Exactly.
Right. Exactly. But now, and the thing is, you also had to think about it like this too. Mike Pence wants to be president.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be president if Trump takes over the entire world and then makes Ivanka president after, you know, he passes on.
100%. And he would have gotten executed. You know, and I think he knew that at this point. If Trump
took over. And that's the other thing.
Right.
I think it is like in the moment, it doesn't seem like he had the full grasp of it. I mean, I think he knows now.
Right.
And that's why now all of a sudden he's all like, you know, now he's in press talking shit. You know, it's like, yeah, well, no, man, fuck that, you know, or his version of it, let's say, because he is, you know, and it's like, it's just so funny because it's like who we decide is going to be the hero and who we decide is going to be the villain in these scenarios. It is just so twisted up at this point that it's like you don't even know what to make of it outside of the fact that, you know, we're just so manipulated. Yep. And you know, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people in the conservative side that just wish that the internet had never even happened, because all of the horrible, heinous things that happen to indigenous people and Black folks and Latinos and everyone, like all of that stuff is laid to bear now. Like some of it, thankfully, you know, I had a chance to chronicle some of it for the YouTube channel Extra Credit, with the Tulsa riots and various other things, and even how, you know, Jackie Robinson was being treated. You know, I mean, that's of course not the most unknown story in the world, but it's seldom discussed in a world where everyone's trying to convince everybody that, you know, oh no, things are fine. You know, it's you know, just a few, you know, bad apples that are doing all this complaining because of civil rights and, you know, woman's right to choose and all this other stuff. It's like they frame it as one way, we frame it as the other way, and then the truth never really seems to bubble to the surface, except in, you know, except for people that are actively going out to find the truth.
Yeah, you got to search for it. I mean, I learned about the Tulsa massacre because I used to go to the Woody Guthrie Folk Festival in Okemah, Oklahoma. and I was out there, and I've landed in Tulsa, and some folk singer, a liberal, old white guy was like, what happened here, right? And that was when I first learned about it. And it wasn't long ago. I'm talking 2015 or 16 that I learned about it. And then I dug deeper, and it was just one of many. There was in Florida, North Carolina, there's a bunch of those massacres,
I'm actually reading a book right now, the Colfax Massacre.
Bingo.
That's another one. That was New Orleans.
Right, exactly. I mean, it just goes on, and they try to protect you from that history. The People's History of the United States is a book by Howard Zinn that uses real historical documents to talk about, and it wasn't just black folks, white folks were getting abused too, like indigenous servants, little kids in factories with the door locks, sewing clothes and stuff. It was, humans have been cannon fodder for greed and capitalism and industrialization. And we're all so much more on the same side than we realize, and the true crime is that, like, Trump and these guys have really been able to drive a wedge between us now more than ever. But, like, fuck, his followers are going to get screwed the hardest. The fact when I saw people being like, Obamacare sucks, I'm like, you got an oxygen tank on the back of your, motorized scooter right now, and tubes up your nose, and you look like you're about 350 pounds, and it doesn't look like you're getting Blue Cross Blue Shield, out of your job. You're getting socialized healthcare right now, and you're railing against it, So, we're out of time now. We've been over an hour. We could talk for another hour, so you're going to have to come back and do it again. And, there's a lot to cover. And let me just put my one more thing on that Mike Pence. Like, I feel like if he had gotten in that limo that he famously, the Secret Service beast or whatever, he would have died. The next headline would have been Mike Pence has a heart attack leaving the Capitol, right? And you would have never known. He just had a heart attack. And one of them Secret Service guys would have, like, stuck a little needle in him or whatever, and it would have been all over. I know that's crazy conspiracy, but I feel like he would have been out of there, especially if Trump then put in, I forget, Chuck Grassley or whatever they were going to make the pro tempore, because there was a whole plan of, like, if Pence left, they could have sort of seized the thing and done martial law. Hopefully, they're not going to go that deep on it on January 6th, on the hearings that start next Thursday, but it will be decent. And for the listeners that want to come see me, I'm going to be in New York City on Tuesday, City Winery. It's a 7:30 p.m. show. It's going to be a lot of fun. I got a friend opening, and I'm doing my hour, my 70 minutes. I do a lot of rock and roll stories and a lot of behind the scenes stuff, kind of like this podcast, and then a lot of jokes. So it's a good time. Come on out. The next night, I'm going to be in Philadelphia at the City Winery. So I'll do my whole Constitution rap, right? That's where it came from. I went down there in November, and I went to the Constitution Museum, by the way. It's like, we all have holes in our education. I had a childhood where I wasn't like, I've read the newspaper every day. I didn't pay attention to class, so there's some stuff, that we can all learn. My point is, it's incumbent upon all of us to get these facts, so we're armed with them, right? And, anyway, so, but it'll be fun. Okay. It's not going to be a monologue on the Constitution. It's going to be some jokes, but there's going to be some truth in there. And I'm going to go hard after that grifter, Dr. Oz, who's now your Senate candidate. And,
can I just throw in one thing real quick, which is very, very funny. Yeah. So John Fetterman, who's running against Dr. Oz, he actually put in some campaign literature email thing that just like yesterday, he said, I didn't know that this was a flex, but I actually live in Pennsylvania. I got to admit, that was pretty funny.
That's very good.
If nothing else, Pennsylvania, do the right thing. Oh my God.
And Dr. Oz lives in Jersey. The other guy, David McCormick, lives in Connecticut. The other guy was like a hedge fund guy. He's from the Carlyle Group. Right. Carlyle Group.
A hedge fund guy. That's a good choice.
Right. And that's what's happening. I mean, I got to shut up or we'll keep going. I only like to take about an hour or so of these guys' times. I think this might be my longest episode ever, but it went fast. It was a good one, dude. You brought a lot of good points, man. I'm sure the people enjoyed listening to you. I know it's a great, thank you for coming, dude. You come back, tell them where to find you.
Oh, yes. Hey, so among other things, when I'm not doing this with Noel, I also write horror and dark fiction. You can find out all about that at www.laughingblackvampire.com. Yeah, Beef, Wine, and Shenanigans. That's a podcast where we sometimes talk nerd stuff, but then because we're upset and we go into politics here and there. So yeah, that's the name of the podcast. It's easy enough to find. It's everywhere you consume podcasts, because I pay a millennial $75 a month to make sure I'm where I'm supposed to be. And yeah, and then I also have Black history stuff on the YouTube channel, Extra Credit, which, if you really want to get down in your history real quick, that's a good website with good YouTube channel to visit and consume mass quantities of information. And
Yeah,
that's all I got for now.
perfect, dude. Check him out, folks. And Black history is American history, right? It's even sold to you as something separate. It's American history. Yes. Black folks were here at the same time we got here, or right after. You know what I mean? Probably like a boat or two after, right? They didn't take long, right? They're like, all right, I see some fields. We ain't gonna clear them, right? So this country was built by people that are not getting their due, and it's still marginalized in terms of, I get why it's called Black history. I'm just saying, I think my audience is mostly white folks, right? It's all white mostly, and I'm trying to change that, but you know how it is.
Well, a couple of people may tune in now that I'm here.
I hear you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm making a joke. Y'all know that. But my point is, it's people. It's American history. We're a melting pot, man. We all got to chip in and make this better. And you got to see the other as your brother and your sister. And then it'll be fun. Flavor is good, right? We need diversity. We need love. And it's summertime. Get out there. Listen to some music. Listen to some birds. Get out in the sun, go for a walk or a hike, or throw a ball around, because there's a lot going down, and we need everybody on hand for the next 6 months, right? Because it's coming down to the wire. But I'll shut up now. That was episode 66 of the Noel Casler podcast. Come out and see me this week, folks. And we'll be back soon. Thank you. Peace.